Hi, you're listening to the Childfree Wealth Podcast. We're your hosts, Bree and Dr. J, certified financial planner. Here we discuss life and finances as it relates to being child-free. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please consult your advisor before implementing any ideas heard on this podcast.
So for the past 8 months, I have had the pleasure of working with Katy, and she has taught me more about the concepts of childless, child-free, other things that I had no clue about. And I'm just being frank on that. I look at things from a financial standpoint and say, once your life is at a point where you don't have kids, not planning on having kids, that's where I come in. But how you get there is huge. And so I've asked Katy to kind of come in, join us, talk about it. But Katy, why don't you introduce yourself and what you've been doing and, this whole Childless Collective you do and everything else. Just give us kind of like an overview of who you are.
Sure. And I should just say too, I have loved working with you as well, Jay. So thank you for inviting me into the work that you do. I've learned a lot about financial planning that I'm implementing in my own life. So, thanks for the work that you're doing as well. My name's Katy. I am the founder of the Childless Collective. It used to be called Chasing Creation, and I just made a move over to a new name. And this has kind of been an evolving project for me. I started it about 5 years ago after my hysterectomy. So my hysterectomy came after 4 years of going through infertility and obviously not having that work out, and then making the decision to have a hysterectomy due to medical reasons. And that kind of was the final moment of, okay, like I'm actually not going to be a mom like I was hoping and like I'd planned. And what does that mean for me? And I found that when I was going through infertility, I had so much support. A lot of my friends and family members got it. I could look on the internet. I could just Google infertility and a million resources came up, support groups, like all this stuff. And once I realized I wasn't going to have kids, there were only a few things I could find. And I felt really lonely. I didn't really know anyone else in my life who was going through it. And so I started as a project of just, let me put out a blog and an Instagram account and see if I can find a few other people who get it that I can connect with and talk to about it. And then that just kind of grew. So now, I've got a lot of people I've met through Instagram and through a lot of events that I've done. So I've hosted a lot of different kinds of events over the years. Some of those are part of my Childless Chat series where I'll bring on guest speakers for conversations every month. I've run support groups for the last 3 years. And then the last 2 years, I've done the Childless Collective Summit, which has had about 3,000 attendees online each year. And then this year, I moved full-time into this and started, kind of became the new host of Jody Day's Gateway Women online community. And so now I am running that community, and it's been just such a fun shift for me. And then it marks my kind of full-time into this work of just being with the childless community and providing support there.
Yeah, and just a little transparency. So Katy has been helping me on, creating videos and doing things for me and helping me with social media, and just because I don't know any of that. And Katy and I, one of our first debates was, how do you explain to the world that we do financial planning for people who don't have kids and aren't planning on having kids? Because if we say, hey, we do financial planning without kids, well, then people will assume, you just don't have them right now. If we say child-free, does that get rid of people that are childless? If we say childless, well, what about the people that, are trying? And, this was just one of those, Katy and I swear we spent months on this debate. And at some point, we came to the conclusion that, Childfree Wealth serves child-free people and permanently childless people. Mm-hmm. But I still don't 100% love the terminology. If we really want to get technical, we could say it is non-parent wealth. If we replace the word child-free with non-parents, or I don't know, but Katy, give me kind of your feel on the word child-free, childless, kind of I know in the child-free community, we're still, debating the word child-free and whether there's a dash in the middle and how it's spelt, and AP Guide says something different than everybody else, and childless, and how do you see the difference between the two?
Oh, I feel like, so this is something I put a lot of thought into. I feel like in just trying to create terms that kind of the world understands, because you'll notice if someone writes an article about people who don't have kids, they often don't differentiate any of the reasons. So they'll use childless when they actually mean someone who's child free. The terminology in the outside world is just, there's like no awareness at all. So I think in terms of just trying to simplify for people outside of our communities, I think it makes sense to have child free means that you didn't want kids. You wanted a child free life. That was your first option, and that's what you wanted. If you are childless, you wanted kids and for whatever reason couldn't have them. And so I feel like just try to make it clear to the outside world, that seems like the simplest way to do it. But once you get into the communities, like you said, there's debates going on within the child-free community about the things that you mentioned. I think with what I've seen in the childless community is we're not having debates about if it should be capitalized, if there should be any hyphens, if we're not having these AP style guideline questions. The thing that I hear from the childless community is we don't like the term. It sounds negative. It sounds like a lack. It's focusing on the lack of what you don't have. And so, we have that term that a lot of us really don't like, but there's no alternative to it. And like you said, even if you say non-parent, well, there are also people who are not parents right now, but they plan to be parents in the future. That's a very different community. You even have people who are going through infertility who would say they were childless if they don't have kids. But if if they have a child after infertility, which most people who go through infertility will end up with a kid, then they're not childless anymore. So it is complicated. I would say, just to add another layer of complexity to it, is that we often kind of have these two terms of child-free means you didn't want kids, childless means you did and you couldn't have them. What I found is that there are some people who fit very neatly into one of those two boxes, but for a lot of people that I talk to, it seems to be more of a spectrum where it's really hard to clearly define exactly where you fall in, because life is complicated, and a lot of reasons there are maybe multiple factors that contribute to us not having kids, and it doesn't always just fit so nicely into that did want or didn't want.
Well, yeah, and I'm gonna put you on the spot here and make you decide what my title is, because my wife and we met in our 20s, and she has a 50-50 chance of dying, and that just kind of made our I argue there's not really a choice there, but whatever. But whether it's by choice or not, I've had people ask a question. I go, there wasn't really. Like, it just, it was an answer. So, okay. So are my wife and I child-free or childless in your terminology?
I would say that it's whatever you define yourself as. Like, I'm definitely in the camp of we should be able to define how we feel. And I think that can fluctuate. So I don't know. I don't know how you and your wife felt about that. Maybe you never wanted kids anyway. And so the fact that would have been, that you have that 50-50 chance of dying wasn't a factor in deciding, because you already didn't want kids. Like, I don't know. I feel like it's really how you define your experience, not about the biology of it. You know what I mean? And I think the piece about, do we have choices? That's another really interesting one, because I'll have people say, well, am I really childless not by choice because I could have done IVF, I could have gotten a surrogate, I could have adopted, so I had choices left. I chose not to pursue those choices for whatever reasons. This is obviously people who are going through infertility. Would I still be childless not by choice if I had choices and didn't pursue them? And so it's complicated. There's some really deep and complex conversations happening within this community.
Well, and I think there's almost like two sets of discussions. There's the within the community, and then there's like within the public. Those are like almost two different. So Chelsea Handler came out and said that she doesn't have kids, and she used the word childless.
Yep.
But then people are like, well, was it by choice or not? And how do and we're not going to go into like how Fox News flipped out on her even saying not having kids is a choice, but whatever. But like, my wife and I, we use the term child free, but that really wasn't even a thing. So my thing on it was, okay, we decided not having kids. It just kind of was what it was. And then a few years later, I'm like, are we weird or not? We are weird, but just kind of like, is there community? And the first thing I found was the child-free Reddit. And I said, okay, these are my people, I guess. Now, the child-free Reddit has its own challenges. Let's just say that. But I'm like, oh, there's a term for it. And that was kind of how how we picked that term. It's not saying, it's the right one, but just kind of like, I don't know. It was okay. I also think there's a lot of people out there that don't have kids, aren't planning on having kids, but don't even see themselves as child-free or childless. It's just kind of like they are.
I 100% agree. I feel like for most of the people in my life, if I think about people who decided not to have kids, I have never heard them self-identify as like, I'm childless, or talk about that, or child-free, or like talk about any like label or term as part of their identity. The times I have heard them talk about it, it's kind of like, oh yeah, kids weren't for us, like, and then they just move on. And it is interesting because I think part of the reason a lot of us have to grapple with this terminology issue is that when we are looking for community and we want to have conversations about the experiences that we have as people without kids, we need to have terms to find each other and to have those conversations. And that's where it gets really hard because, we haven't even mentioned yet that even within the childless not by choice community, my path to that was infertility. And I would say if you wanted to get more complicated, there were other factors too that I could say that, that it wasn't just infertility, but that's not even mentioning the fact that a lot of people who wanted kids and don't have them, it was due to completely different circumstances too, like not finding the right partner, having a partner who maybe one person wanted kids and the other didn't. Maybe the person that you are with, you don't feel would be a good person to bring a child into that relationship with, like they may not make a good parent, and so you don't want to have that. You may have, trauma from childhood or mental health issues that you don't, just some kind of genetics you don't want to pass on. You could have health issues like, you could, I guess this would be, your wife would fall into this category too. You could have health issues that really limit your ability or the safety and to be able to have a child safely. There's so many. It's not like two things. Like it's so complex, and we don't often have space to talk about that complexity.
Absolutely. And I think some of the complexity is our own like personal beliefs, and and some of it we should share and some we shouldn't, and that's your choice. And there's this long continuum that starts with childless not by choice, people that truly wanted to have kids and couldn't or didn't or whatever their circumstances are. To the far side, we have the antinatalists who believe nobody should have kids. Mm-hmm. And there's this and I just learned about this one now, pro-mortalism. People who don't think it, part of the antinatalists who don't believe people should, the suffering should end as quick as possible. Let's call it that. And I know I'm simplifying things, but there's this continuum, and it's this wide range. And I feel, this is my own personal belief, that out in public, there's a lot of judgment right now. I think it's around political, cultural, religious. I mean, I'm in Deep South. I'm in Mississippi right now. So, I mean, that's really part of what I'm feeling. But there's this judgment. If you're child-free, it's kind of like, oh, you're evil because you choose not to have kids. And if you're childless, it's like, oh, I feel bad for you. I mean, does that make any sense?
It does. I definitely think the two are viewed differently because if society views having children as the thing that everyone should aspire to, and it's put on this pedestal of this is what will give you meaning in life, it's what brings you happiness, it is the end all be all. If you're saying I want to opt out of that, then people are going to view that differently than if you're saying I wanted to opt in and I couldn't. I at least tried to get there, right? And let me be clear, like, I think both of those are totally messed up. I'm not saying I agree with any of that backlash that comes to people without kids. It's ridiculous. But I think from a societal perspective, yeah, women and men and non-binary, everyone who didn't want kids, gets seen as, why are you opting out of the system that you're supposed to be wanting to opt into? For those of us who are childless, it's like you at least you tried to get to the right place. And it's interesting because I do see I've heard people who are child free by choice say, well, sometimes I'll actually tell people that I wanted kids and couldn't have them because I'd rather have the pity than have to deal with the bingos of me looking like, people saying I'm selfish or, all the bingos that people who are child free get. And then I've heard people who are childless say, oh yeah, I sometimes will just let people think, or I'll say that I'm child free by choice because I would rather get that stigma attached to me and deal with that than have to have people prying into my grief and asking me questions and giving me unsolicited advice about, how to get a baby. And so it's interesting that I think both communities get faced with different reactions from society, and they're all total BS. Like, I think there's just so much misinformation, and people just aren't educated on what our experiences are like, whether we're child free or childless. And that conversation, it's like it hasn't even started in the public eye yet.
Yeah, I think people don't even realize we exist. I do a lot of press, and I have people go, really? This exists? And you can do financial planning just for these people? And they think like I'm talking like 6 people. But the recent Michigan study, all right? So they redid the study, and we'll include a link in the notes. But they found just about 20% of adults are child-free, defined as don't have kids, not planning on having kids, by choice. And somewhere around 5% were childless, and their definition was not by choice there. And the bottom line is let's add it together, 25% of this population, and whether or not Michigan is representative of the whole country, it's close enough. Let's just go with it. 25% is child-free or childless, permanently childless, and technically. In comparison, in that population, 7-point-some-odd% were LGBT. So we're talking about like 3 times the size of the LGBT community, but people don't realize we exist. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I'm out in the public going, please, I'm tired of financial people saying child-free people exist. I talk to child-free people about finances, and people are like, oh, well, it's just a subset, and you'll grow out of it. I hate that one. Or you'll change your mind, or blah, 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 and I'm like, what the heck? But you and I had a good debate offline. We're talking about the percentage that are child-free versus childless. Mm-hmm. And you had some thoughts about the data. I mean, what do you think? I mean, do you think, by the way, I don't have any data besides Michigan to go on, but do you think, hey, that's kind of the right direction that, 4 times as many are child-free as childless? Or what do you think?
So after we had our, because I hadn't read the study yet. So you had told me those statistics and I hadn't actually read the study. So I did read the study. I listened to an interview with the authors of the study, and it totally made sense in the context of who they were asking. And so I think the reason you see different statistics depending on what research study you're looking at is that you have to look at how they're classifying people and who's in their data set. So in the Michigan study, from what I could tell, it says adults, which I don't know if I saw an exact age, but I'm assuming that meant that it could mean anyone 18 and above. If
that's my assumption.
Classified adults, I couldn't see, maybe I missed it, but I didn't see like an actual number. But in my mind, if you're saying adults, you're looking at 18 and up. And what I do think made sense with their study that is lacking in most other studies when you're trying to find statistics is that they actually ask people if not having kids was by choice or not. Like, did you want kids or not? And are you planning to have kids later? Because those definitions are really important. So one of the things they brought up about the study was that in some classifications of childless, they're throwing anyone in there who had like a medical condition or infertility or who can no longer have kids because of age. They're like women who aren't of childbearing years anymore and that kind of thing are all getting lumped into childlessness if there's a medical factor, even though some of those people may not have wanted kids anyway. And so they should have been classified as child-free, but in the study they may get picked up as childless because they said they had a fertility issue or a medical condition or something. So I think the numbers make sense. I think especially because you're including a lot of younger people, like I don't know what the age breakdown was of participants, but if you got younger people in there, it does seem like more Gen Zers are being more thoughtful about, do I want kids or not? And just having it be an automatic assumption of this is just what you do. I think a lot of people from my generation up, I'm on the cusp of millennial, like Gen X. I'm kind of right on the line. I don't feel like a lot of my friends and family members put a lot of thought into if they wanted kids. It was kind of just like, yeah, you get married, you have kids, you buy the house. It's like, you call it the life script. You're following this life script. And there's not a lot of like thought put into it. It's just kind of an assumption of like, yeah, of course I want kids. This is what we're doing. And I do feel like Gen Z is questioning that more and looking at structures that they're being given and saying, wait, is this actually a fit for my life? Is this what I want to do? Does it still make sense to go to college? Does it still make sense to buy a house? Does marriage still make sense? Does having kids make sense? I think they're just questioning all of those scripts that they're being given in ways that maybe previous generations haven't as much. And I think that's a really good thing. So I can see why numbers would be higher if you're including people in those younger generations. I think studies that I've seen, if you're just looking at women who are past their childbearing years and seeing which of them have kids or not, those numbers seem to be different.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's a generational thing or an age thing. Like, kind of like as Gen Z gets to past their childbearing years, does that hold true? I don't know. I mean, the bottom line of the data is there's a lot of us.
There's a lot of us, regardless of, I mean, I think it's important to, like, I want to know where people are in that spectrum, but at the same time, if just in terms of numbers, yeah, there's a lot of people who end up being adults that don't have kids.
Yeah, and so, but let me ask you kind of a spin on it. And we're going to do a separate episode on the life script and life planning because that's a whole separate topic. But I did an interview for Men's Health magazine that came out after the Michigan study, and they were talking about men who are child-free in this example. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions they asked is like, okay, everything I see online is like women and child-free or childless. Mm-hmm. And your community, I know, is for women and non-binary. But why do you they asked me the question, I put my answer in the article, but why do you think that, I mean, if you look at most of the online communities, it's something like 80% women or more, depending on the community. Yeah. Why? What? I mean, just are us men like just not talking about it, not welcome? I mean, let's be real. Your community, I wouldn't be welcome in your community because it's just for women, and that makes sense. But does that mean women, men who are childless don't have the same issues?
Ooh, okay. So you're touching on something that has come up a lot. I've had some conversations about this with men in the childless community. So I'm gonna, for just the sake of me talking about things that I actually have experience with, I'm going to just focus on the childless community because I have had conversations with people there. I don't have answers for the child-free community in terms of the gender piece because I just don't know. I don't have as many of those conversations. But so you are right in that the online community that I run is for childless women and non-binary people. That is specifically because I need that to be a safe environment for people to disclose things and have like conversations. And, it's just a fact that if there are men in that community, those conversations aren't going to happen in the same way. And I have gotten I get predatory messages from men of like, oh, you're childless, let me get you pregnant kind of thing. Like they're I consider women who are childless not by choice and grieving a vulnerable population in the sense that they're grieving, they're coming for emotional support. I don't want anyone catfishing in there. I don't want anyone and just the fact that like different conversations are going to happen if men are in that space. So we talk a lot about our bodies, like struggles with menopause, sex. It's not all we're talking about, but there are just certain things that women aren't going to feel safe talking about these things if men are in the room. It's going to create a different dynamic. So the online community, yes, that is true. The rest of the work that I do, it is totally open to everyone. It might not look like it because men are not engaging with me. I can tell you from my Instagram account, I don't feel like most of my posts are not gendered, like the information, what I'm talking about, but 99%, I can look in my like list of followers, 99% are women. And I think the other 1% are mostly bots. I do have a couple of guys that follow me and that do engage with me and my content. And I've gotten a couple of messages. I would say in the 5 years that I've been doing this, there is like less than 10 men that I can think about that have done any kind of engagement with me. Messaged me, liked my stuff, commented on my stuff, attended one of my events, any of it. And I did include some men at the Childless Collective last year as speakers. And I'm really grateful that there are men who are talking about it. And I could go on and on all day on this, but I've gotten some questions on why aren't you creating content just for men? And it really bothers me because I'm like, well, most of my content isn't gendered. So everyone can come and engage and have these conversations. And I'm not going to go to, like, I can't tell you how many like conferences or events I've been to where it's an all male lineup of speakers. And I've never once been like, well, I can't engage in this conversation, or none of this is going to apply to me, or I shouldn't listen to any of this because it's just guys saying it. Like, I feel like there's kind of a sexism thing that it's like, I want to hear a guy say it because that's who I want to listen to. And if it's not a guy, it's not applicable to me. So I don't know.
And by the way, so I met Katy because Katy reached out to me to be part of her event. And this was just about a year ago. And one of the questions she got was, well, this guy's talking about child-free finances. Does it work for people that are childless? And I'm like, yes. Finances don't change based on which term you use. My argument is if you're still trying to conceive, I'm not the right person for you. Once you've gotten to a point where you're permanently childless or you're child-free, I can help you. But even in my Instagram, and I don't do much, but getting there, I don't know, it's probably 80% women. Yeah. Out of my client base, I've only once had a single male. Everybody else has either been a single woman or a couple. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, and this is bucking a little bit of the financial trends, women are usually the one reaching out, which usually in finance, that is not the case. I'm not saying right or wrong, it's just data. So I don't know. I mean, my take on it, because I am male, is that it's a bit easier for men to be child-free or childless than women. And that might be an exaggeration or understatement, depending on how you look at it. Yes, I get a lot of questions, but my wife gets 10 times as much, and that's the reality check of it. And if I talk to other men and say, hey, I'm child-free, they're like, you got lucky, where women don't necessarily get that same answer.
Well, sorry, go ahead. I have some more thoughts, but you go ahead.
No, I just think the challenge is what we need to do at some point is be okay talking about child-free and childless as one community, and men and women as one community as part of that. But we also need our safe spaces for both. So there's kind of like, you can have segment, but we also need to be able to support each other as a whole. I mean, the 25% of us need to come together. And by the way, the data on that says actually, for some reason, more men are child-free or childless than women in the data they found. Now, that might be a reporting error.
I feel like, but I feel like what the researchers said about that is part of why they felt their results were different is that they found that more white men and more men and white men identify as child-free. And so a lot of the studies that are done around childlessness are focused on women. They're asking women. And so by including men in the study, I think that is one of the reasons why if you're looking at population overall, you have higher numbers than if you're just looking at women. And I think there's probably some societal factors of that. But before we go on too much.
Hold on, before that, Katy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The census data, when they looked at childless, over 55, found the same thing. There were more men than women. So, and that's specifically in people who do not have biological children. They also pulled out people who have stepchildren and other things. But right. that data there also says, it's only like 1 or 2%, but there's slightly more. My point is, online, you would never believe that. If you
Yeah, sorry. No, I and you are right. So there are more, yes, you are right in that. I guess what I'm saying is, part of the reason that the researchers of the Michigan study gave for why their numbers are higher of people who identified as child-free by choice was because there were more like men included in the study, whereas if you're just asking women, and if you look at research that's just focused on women, those numbers tended to shift, or could be how they classified it. But they did say in their research that part of the reason that more people are identifying as child-free was because because men were included. And
that's fair.
But I do want to just say before we move into a different topic, because I have had so many good conversations with a few men who are in the childless community, and I don't want their voice to go unheard, because I do hear a lot of, well, not a lot, but I've heard from a handful of those men that say, this is really hard for us too, and we don't have spaces to talk about it. So there is a Facebook group called the Childless Men's Community, and it looks like there's about 300 members in it. It's run by 2 really incredible men in the childless community, and so if men are looking for support, that is a great resource. They are both awesome, and so I highly recommend that to anyone who's looking for support who is a guy who's childless. And I do agree with what you said about just societally. I do think it adds additional layers to be a woman without kids than to be a man without kids, and how we're viewed, and in the attachment of it is the purpose of your life to be a mom kind of attitudes that we get. I also will say that I think, at least in the childless community, one of the reasons you don't get as many men talking about it is that there are societal kind of rules or expectations that men are not supposed to talk about their feelings. They're not supposed to be expressing vulnerability, talking about grief, talking about things that are hard for them. For men who went through infertility, there's also an attachment to like, this is connected to your manhood and your legacy. And I think that maybe men have some different barriers societally to being safe or comfortable talking openly about those things. And that sucks. Like I see that, and I do think that's another big reason too.
Yeah, and just for everybody listening, Katy and I literally can go on for days on this, and we essentially have over time. Like, we've had these debates for hours on different things and messaging and structures and different things. I don't know. What I'm trying to do is just start the conversation. The terms child-free, childless, dash or not, whatever, who knows? One of the ones I'm doing, and just kind of a little craziness, and you can all be involved. On August 1st, it is International Child Free Day. It is actually the 50th anniversary of that. And we are going to be hosting a billboard in Times Square celebrating what it's like to be child-free. It's going to be, hey, I celebrate my child-free life by. And did you know today's child-free day? Did you know 20% of the U.S. is child? What do you think, Katy? Is that going to rile people up?
I don't know. I'm really excited to see the response. I have always been shocked that just by simply saying I don't have kids is like such a threat to people. Like, people can have very visceral responses to that, and even if it's not anything about their life. So we'll see how that goes. I'm excited. I want to see how people respond.
Yeah, I'm excited and a little bit nervous. You never know. You will have to then do one that says, I'm celebrating my childless life and see how people respond to that differently. We could do a whole sociological experiment on that. But where can they find you, Katy? So if they want to engage your community, engage in the work you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm just on childlesscollective.com is my main website, so people can go there. I'm definitely the most active on Instagram, though, which is Childless Collective is where you can find me.
All right, great. And Katy's going to join us a little bit later. Look for the next episode when we debate the standard life plan, life script, and how it's different for child-free or childless people.
That's all for this week's episode of Childfree Wealth Podcast. Be sure to follow Childfree Wealth on social media, email us at podcast@childfreewealth.com, or visit our website, www.childfreewealth.com.